Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to tackle a subject that I haven't seen anyone else do on YouTube, but if you're in the market for an Akiya in Japan, especially one built 40 years ago or more, this is something you really need to know about, and it's Japanese toilets, and specifically the way they handle sewage in Japan. If you've been to Japan before, you'll know that the squat toilet, or some people call it a traditional toilet, is still in use. They're nowhere near as common as they used to be. Back when I first started going to Japan 25 years ago, they were very common. But now you'll only find them in some of the older train stations and roadside rest areas sometimes, and of course, older Akiyas. There are two types of squat toilet. Some of them are flushing, and some of them are not. They're actually not connected to any kind of plumbing. What they have is a tank underneath the toilet, which is usually concrete with a fiberglass liner, although some of the really old ones probably don't even have that. And it is literally just collected, usually monthly, by some contractor in the neighbourhood. This service is still available, so some people are persisting with the old style toilets, especially older people who are just used to doing it that way. The reason they did it this way is because up until the 60s, they were still using night soil or human waste as fertilizer in agriculture. However, as the population got a lot bigger, it came to a point where they couldn't keep doing that and they needed to modernize their sewer systems. That said, they didn't really get sewers everywhere in Japan until the late 80s. So in the intervening time, a lot of people went for a more modern septic tank system, which at least allowed you to have a flushing toilet because it could deal with a lot more water. And here we come to the problem if you have the older what they call manual collection sewer system. It's not a good idea to have a flushing toilet with that system. For one thing, the tanks are pretty small. They can't really deal with that much water. And if you do have a lot of water in them, that actually creates bigger odor problems than if you don't. You have to add special powders that neutralize the odor. There are some microbial things you can add to improve them. But ultimately, they're never going to work as well as a more modern style of septic tank. Usually there will be a long pipe sticking out of the tank that goes up above the roof of the house to let odours out. But ultimately with this type of toilet, there's always going to be a bit of a smell. And that's why you'll often see there's a little wooden cover put over the toilet to try and reduce that. And that's also there to keep insects out. You will see sometimes when you're looking at the old Akiyas that they've added a little plastic seat above the traditional toilet, which is purely for elderly people who can't quite squat anymore, and it isn't actually any upgrade to the sewer system. It's even possible to have a modern looking toilet above this type of tank. Typically that won't be an actual flushing toilet, although they may use a washlet bidet system on the seat. Usually that amount of water is not a problem, but going for a full flush toilet is, as I said, not really realistic with that type of manual collection system. So if you do happen to buy a house that has that type of system, you've got a couple of options. One, obviously, is to put up with it and have the waste collected every month or so, and keep putting powders or chemicals or whatever in there to reduce the odour. But if you do want a flushing toilet, then you're better off to look at either a modern septic tank or connecting to the town sewer. Now, depending on the area you're in, they may allow you to put in a septic tank or they may not. The modern septic tanks that they started using from the early 80s in Japan actually have a fan that blows air into the tank to help the microbes in there survive, the bacteria, and they actually break down the waste and remove any odors. So it's a much more agreeable system, but you still have to get those emptied. How often will depend on the size of the tank, how many people in the house, that kind of thing. But even if you're hardly ever going there, you'd probably want to do it once a year. But if a septic tank isn't an option, then you will need to connect to the town sewer, which is usually under the road outside your house. The cost of that will depend a lot on how far your toilet is from the sewer system. You'll always have to pay a fee to the local government to get permission to connect to the sewer, which in the area my house is in is about 150,000 yen. But the bigger cost is actually getting a contractor to come and do it. Obviously, they're going to have to dig up the ground, concrete, around your house in order to put in piping and connect up to the sewer. Depending on how big a job that is, you might be looking at 500,000 yen or up to 1,000,000 yen. But if you are planning to live in the house long term, then it's probably worth doing. I haven't looked into the cost of installing a new septic tank system, but I imagine it'd be quite similar, really. There's a fair bit of digging and all that equipment to go in. So to sum up, it's very important to find out what is connected to your house and how much it's going to cost to upgrade it if you do need to, because particularly if you're buying a very cheap Akiya, it might hurt a bit to have to suddenly spend 1,000,000 yen on upgrading the sewer. A couple of other things I'd like to mention while we're on the subject of Japanese toilets. You'll often find in older Akiyas that the toilet is not white. They came in loads of different colours, blue, pink, you name it. During the 80s and 90s, there was a creamy colour that was very popular. And so when the washlet electric bidet seats came into fashion, they were usually also in that colour. Unfortunately, now it looks as if you have a grimy toilet. And sometimes it looks worse than it is because the heating of the toilet seat actually causes the seat over time to discolour. So it looks as if you've got a dirty toilet seat when in fact the plastic has actually become darker around the seat. So if you see that, don't worry. It's not a filthy toilet, it's just old. Of course, the problem then is if you want to buy a new washlet, they're almost universally white these days. You can probably find a cream one, but the vast majority of them are white, and that's not going to go with the old toilet bowl and cistern. So if you do want a pristine white toilet, then that's something to consider too. Also, if you want to add a washlet bidet seat to an older toilet, you'll need to check if there is power in the room, whether or not there's a power point in the wall, because you'll need that to run the washlet. In case you don't know much about them, they actually have a small canister inside of heated water that is used to heat the seat, and it's also used for the bidet spray, which is delivered by a mechanical arm, which can move forward and back and various other things. Most of the modern ones also have a blow dryer function, so you don't need to use quite as much toilet paper to dry yourself off. So as I said, obviously you're going to need power, and you're going to need a water supply for the bidet seat. This can either be run from the water supply tap. Some of them also have a small pipe that goes into the cistern and tees into the water supply in there to make it a bit tidier. Of course, if you're buying a new house, they will have already done all the plumbing for that because that's what everybody wants. I've had a look into the cost of doing a toilet upgrade in my Akiyas, and it works out to be about 300,000 yen per toilet room. About 100,000 yen of that is the actual hardware, the new toilet bowl, cistern, and the bidet seat. Quite a lot of the cost is removing the old one and also disposing of it, because getting rid of construction waste in Japan is very expensive. And then obviously there's fitting the new toilet, fitting the PowerPoint, and finishing off the job. That doesn't include the cost of doing new tiling and wallpapering or whatever if you need that. That cost is not so prohibitive, but when you add it to having to upgrade the sewer, it starts to be a substantial amount of money. So as I said, just make sure you consider that when you are looking at Akiyas, and ask yourself how important it is to you and how it's going to affect you depending on the way you're using the house. As always, thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll be back soon. Cheers.